Hello everyone. Today we're going to build a gaming PC while completely blindfolded. We ended up facing a lot of issues like the PC not turning on at first. I had to do a bunch of stuff to get it to turn on. And once it did turn on, it completely turned itself off for an unknown reason. Well, starting off is the CPU installation, which I shoved in upside down at first. Just a heads up, I sped up the video from 4 hours down to just 6 minutes. You're welcome for not wasting your time watching me feel around every component before I got a restraining order. Installing the RAM is pretty difficult as they're similar on both sides, but I felt the sticker on one side and just knew that that's the right way. I tracked the sticker on the next RAM as well and pushed it in. Next up is the M.2 SSD, where in my head I was imagining the slot to be in the wrong space at first, and then I figured it out. But then, once I put the SSD in, I lost a screw, which I spent around 5 minutes looking for. This is very sped up, so it might seem like a very easy process, but for me, it was a living hell. And I pre-installed the standoffs for the tower cooler. Next up is thermal paste, for which I sat and thought for about 5 minutes on how I should do it. But then I tracked it with my fingers, and I think I got it right. This might be a little too much thermal paste, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. With the thermal paste in, I wasn't going to spread it out, and I just moved on to the cooler, hoping it would spread it out. And as I mentioned before, I pre-installed the standoffs of the tower cooler because I knew I couldn't do it blindfolded. All I had to do now was get the screws in place, screw them in by hand a little, and then put it down with the screwdriver. But an issue I kept facing with this cooler was that it kept shifting. I'm not sure why, but it didn't stay upright. I took the blindfold shades off and then checked it out and set up the case. Once I set the case up on the desk, I put the goggles back on and put the wires aside. The next step was to get the IO shield in place, but this was going to be a really big challenge. And because I couldn't see the camera or where it was facing, I kind of did this too much to the right. But once I was done, I spent a good 15 minutes fiddling with it, and once it was in, I held the motherboard upright with the tower cooler and got one screw in. I shoved it in with my finger and screwed that in. After that, the thing stayed upright and I just needed to screw the rest of the screws in. During this voiceover, I think I've realized that I missed a couple of screws. Well then, after that, the GPU was next. This GPU is the 5700 XT, and just to let you guys know, this PC will be flipped and I have an upcoming series, which you might be interested in. Installing the GPU is one of the most simple parts, because it only goes in one way and it only goes in through one side. So it simplifies it to one dimension. Once that was in, I lined it up and tried to hack it in. Once that was in, I figured the cable out and tried to do that. That did take a little time, but it was done. The cabling took a little time, but I set it up when I wasn't blindfolded to pull the wires out where they're supposed to go in. So all I had to do was feel them around and then do it. Honestly, looking back at this clip, I'm not sure why it took me this long. This was a 2-minute clip that I only used the last portions of, and yeah, it's kind of embarrassing. Once I did get it in, I wasn't sure if the power button was on or off, so I just went with my gut, and I could always switch it on later if it didn't work out. Well then, let's move on to turning this PC on. And does it work? No, it doesn't. Well, let's try again. No. Maybe it's the power button. Maybe that's what I messed up. Once again, failure. Now at this point, I was really confused because I knew these parts worked and I was just hoping I didn't mess the motherboard up. But then I remembered, I didn't plug the IO cables in. This is one of the biggest challenges, especially blindfolded. If you have ever built a PC in your life, you know these are really difficult to handle. And when blindfolded, it was a nightmare. Well, I used my 2.5 brain cells to separate the LED, the power switch and the reset switch, because the LED has differentiated positive and negative ends. So I plugged one of them in And now let's check if it turns on. No, it doesn't. So that leaves out the other one. It's pretty simple, isn't it? Now, if this doesn't work as well, I'm going to throw this out of the window and I will record it. Well then, it does work and it turns on. That's amazing. After hours of darkness and sweat, I could hear my machine breathe to life. And I felt around the LED switch and showed that off. But then for some reason, it turned off. I took my shades off and then I realized I never installed the CPU cooler. So in this meantime, the CPU thermal throttled and turned itself off. I did this while not being blindfolded because I couldn't do it without my eyes. With this plugged in, I just want to ask you to subscribe and stay tuned for a series that I will be calling Flipping PCs Till I